I know I have heard from industries all across the board, obviously, just how critically important the Red Sea and Suez Canal are to an efficient supply chain. Dr. Robbie, in your testimony, you state that while oil and gas shipments are being impacted, the greater threat is the shipment of specific goods with specific delivery times. You also mentioned that disrupting the 30% of global container traffic on the Red Sea will have a greater impact on the economy than the 10% of oil traffic. Can you speak a little bit more to these goods shipped through the Red Sea and what impacts delayed shipments have on the global economy and commerce? Absolutely. And then as a follow-up to that, Mr. Gold, I'd be curious your thoughts on the impact to consumer prices.
I'll be very quick. Energy supplies are fungible. Oil is oil. Yes, there are different categories of oil, but once the products have been refined, they can be replicated and supplanted by different shipments from all over the world. Goods, however, are targeted towards specific purchasers, and so you can't just make up for somebody's race car that is due to be at a specific race at a specific time by substituting another one. So there are a different set of equities for the container carriers versus the oil and gas industry and the wider energy industry. In fact, one of the other disparities is that oil and gas movements through the Red Sea are actually a much smaller percentage of the overall traffic than the container goods. And so that is why I would argue that the container industry, which is why it's important to have Mr. Dar here, is more affected by this.
Yeah, as a follow-up too, how much, let's just assume hypothetically that all trade is cut off there. How much of the U.S. economy is represented with that? What is that figure?
I do not have that figure. That is not my area of expertise. But what I can say is that it's not just the U.S. economy, it's global because of the nature of our globalized supply chains. And the important piece that I would also note that doesn't get looked at as much is that it is not just goods for sale. It is also humanitarian aid. And so there are other consequences to this that transcend just the marketplace and go as well to desperately needed aid, medical supplies, other things that need to get to places on time in order to make sure human life is protected.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts there from the panel? Mr. Gold, do you want to talk about inflationary impact?
Sure. I mean, obviously we saw what happened during the pandemic when supply chains were essentially shut down and the impact we saw on prices and costs and everything else. I think right now it's too early to tell what that impact is going to be because of what's happening in the Red Sea. I think as we talked about here, carriers and shippers will find a way to make product arrive. It might arrive later than you expected. You're going to have an impact on not just retailers, but manufacturers who are waiting on inputs to production, on ag products. You're already seeing the impact in Europe with ag products that are having to go around the Cape Good Hope that are having spoilage and having impact there. So I think, for my members, they're trying to contain costs as much as possible. So again, for the larger retailers, they're more nimble at being able to do that. For small and medium-sized companies, that's going to impact them more because they don't have that ability to negotiate on whether it's rates, surcharges, what have you. And again, it's not just on the rates that you're seeing in the surcharges, but it's the other impact on the congestion issues that we're going to witness if the surge does come and starts to clog up reports once again. You're going to see the additional charges from every mode of transportation throughout the supply chain as we witnessed during the pandemic. Hopefully we won't see the prices rise as much. That shouldn't be an issue. But again, it's way too early to tell what that economic impact is going to be. But we need to start paying attention now and working through those issues so we don't have congestion as we witnessed during the pandemic.
So what improvements do we need to make at our ports? What kind of alternative thinking, additional resources, what kind of opportunity does that present to us?
I think the biggest issue right now is, as we talked about earlier, we're making investments on the land side infrastructure, but we've got to work through some of the operational issues that really caused the congestion issues we saw during the pandemic. We've got to make sure all of the stakeholders, the carriers, terminals, drayage trucks, railroads, warehouses, the shippers are all talking to each other to understand what's happening at any point in time so that we don't have the congestion issues. Making sure we have equipment readily available, the chassis, the rail cars, are there when they need to be there and not cause further congestion.
Mr. Dart, it looked like you had something to say.
I did, thank you, sir. First of all, I'd like to say I agree with that interconnectivity that Mr. Gold just laid out. I think that's spot on. And I want to congratulate the Department of Transportation for initiating the flow process, which is a pretty good attempt to try and open up some more visibility with the hope that we can project forward patterns much better based on the past. And it's an example of a genuine public-private partnership that I think deserves some recognition. Also, I want to point out that when it comes to containerized goods, they're not all affected equally here. And the higher value that the goods are relative to their volume that goes into a container, the much less affected they are by excursions in price. And as I mentioned earlier, we're not seeing anywhere near the sort of price excursions in the open market that we did during the pandemic. And also keep in mind, the baseline of which we might say prices are higher or less actually is a baseline which was at a very low point in the market, below pandemic levels. And in a lot of cases, like, for example, in exports of U.S. ag cargoes, a lot of those we were carrying at below our costs at the time. So it's not painting the full picture just to look at an absolute pricing point. Thank you.
Thank you very